The sound of glass breaking echoed across the wedding hall like a gunshot. Everyone froze. Heads turned, music stopped mid-beat, and for one heavy second the only sound was the sharp crackle of champagne spilling across the polished floor. My daughter-in-law's hand trembled as she stared at the shards at her feet. She had just said it, loud enough for every guest nearby to hear. "He's just a waiter." Her words hung in the air like smoke, cruel, careless, and final. Then, from the far side of the room, a voice cut through the silence. "Wait a second, he's on TV." That was the moment her face drained of color, the moment her world tilted. Sandra, my son's new wife, looked at me as though she were seeing me for the first time. "And me?" I smiled. Not the smile of a bitter man, no. It was the smile of someone who had been pushed down for far too long, who had swallowed humiliation for years, and who suddenly felt the tide turning. My name is Leonard Hayes. I am 67 years old. Most people in this town know me only by the black and white uniform I wear 5 nights a week at Delaney's Steakhouse, the fanciest spot in the city. I'm the man who carries trays with a polite, "Yes, ma'am," and clears plates with quiet speed. I'm the one who slips by unnoticed while men in expensive suits laugh too loud and women in diamonds sip martinis that cost more than my entire shift. But before I wore that bow tie, before I learned how to make myself invisible in a crowded room, I had another life. One that most people, even my own son, never bothered to ask about. And tonight, at his wedding, in front of 300 people, it was about to surface whether I wanted it to or not. The day had begun like any other. I had woken up in my small apartment above a hardware store, brewed my black coffee, and stared at the picture of my late wife on the mantel. Ruth had been gone for 12 years now. She used to say weddings were about beginnings, not endings. If she were alive, she would have been front row at our son's big day, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, clapping until her hands hurt. But me, I wasn't invited. At least not as a guest. I was on the schedule. My manager at Delaney's had begged me to cover the event because the regular staff was short. I told him it was my son's wedding. He laughed. "Then you'll get to see it up close, won't you?" So there I was, polishing glasses, balancing trays, moving quietly around the tables decorated with roses and gold-trimmed candles. My son Daniel looked sharp in his tailored tuxedo, the kind I could never have afforded. He didn't glance my way once. Not once. Sandra, the bride, barely acknowledged me except to wave me off when I tried to refill her glass earlier. The reception hall sparkled with chandeliers, and every table was filled with people who whispered about real estate deals, vacations in Tuscany, and startup investments. These were her people, not mine. I was the help in their eyes. And I would have stayed invisible, if not for Sandra's words. It happened fast. She was laughing with her bridesmaids, holding her champagne flute in one hand, gesturing with the other. I had just passed by, carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Someone asked who I was, why I seemed to know the groom. Sandra's laugh was sharp, careless. "Oh, him. Don't worry. He's just a waiter." The words cut straight through me, but I didn't flinch. Years in this job had taught me how to wear a mask, how to keep my hands steady even when my heart shook. I kept walking, tray balanced, eyes forward. But others heard her. And then came the shout. A man at the corner table, middle-aged, red tie, face flushed from wine. He pointed directly at me. "Wait a second, he's on TV." The room turned. All those polished, perfumed faces swiveled toward me with curiosity, shock, disbelief. Sandra's hand trembled, the glass slipped, and it shattered. And in that instant, everything changed. Because here's the truth. I wasn't always just a waiter. Years ago, I lived another life. I had a name people recognized, a face strangers stopped in the street. I was part of something bigger than myself, something that once made my son proud. Until life, cruel and unrelenting, took it all away. Sandra never cared to ask about my past. Daniel stopped asking long ago, after Ruth died and after my career crumbled. To them, I was the old man working shifts because his pension wasn't enough. To them, I was the shadow who lived on the edge of family photographs, the one who never belonged at the main table. But that man's shout ripped the curtain open. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. Yet before you think this is some sweet moment of recognition, let me tell you, standing in that spotlight, hearing the whispers rise, seeing my daughter-in-law's jaw tighten with panic, it wasn't only pride I felt. It was pain. Do you know what it feels like to give your life to your family, to sacrifice every dream, every dollar, every ounce of energy, and then to be dismissed with a laugh? To hear, just a waiter, when you've carried a child on your shoulders through storms, when you've stayed awake 3 nights straight to pay hospital bills, when you've put everyone else ahead of yourself. That was the sting beneath my smile. That was the fire rising in my chest. But anger alone wouldn't change anything. Tonight was different. Tonight, the truth had found its way to the surface, and no one, not even Sandra with her perfect makeup and her cutting words, could stop it. On TV, someone whispered. What does he mean? I've seen him before, another guest murmured. He looks familiar. Sandra's face flushed deep red as the crowd buzzed louder. She reached for Daniel's arm, whispering something frantic. He looked at me then, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years. His eyes narrowed as if he were trying to connect the dots of a puzzle he had forgotten existed. The DJ, unsure what to do, let the microphone squeal before cutting the music completely. For a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to tilt in my direction. And I knew. This was the turning point. All these people saw an old man with graying hair and tired eyes. They saw a bow tie, a tray, polished shoes. What they didn't see were the decades that led here. The choices I made. The career I gave up. The sacrifices that cost me my health, my marriage, my place in Daniel's world. They didn't know I had stood under brighter lights once. They didn't know I had been in living rooms across America. They didn't know the story Sandra had just tried to bury with a single laugh. But they were about to find out. So when I smiled that slow, steady smile, it wasn't arrogance. It wasn't revenge. It was the smile of a man who had been underestimated for far too long. A man who had waited patiently for a moment like this. A man who finally realized that life has a strange way of circling back, forcing the truth into the light. Sandra's champagne still bubbled across the floor, her bridesmaids frozen in awkward silence, guests leaning forward in curiosity. And I knew, nothing about this wedding would ever be the same again. Because I wasn't going to stay silent. Not this time. The truth I had buried was ready to break free, and when it did, it would shake this entire room. I glanced at Daniel. My son. My only son. The boy I raised to believe in dreams, now standing beside a woman who had just cut me down in front of everyone. His face was pale, uncertain. And for the first time in years, he looked at me as if I weren't invisible. Actually, I said, my voice steady, carrying across the hushed room, I was. But before I could finish, the DJ's microphone crackled, and a spotlight swung toward me. And that's when the real story began. The spotlight was hot on my face, but the silence in that ballroom was even hotter. All eyes locked on me, waiting, whispering, questioning. Sandra clutched Daniel's arm so tightly her nails dug into his sleeve. My son stared at me as though he was seeing a stranger, not his father. And I let them all wait. For 67 years, I had carried stories no one cared to hear. Tonight, those stories finally had an audience. Actually, I said slowly, my voice carrying across the hall, I was someone very different before all this. The words were vague, but they were enough to send a ripple through the crowd. Phones came out, some guests whispering into each other's ears, trying to place my face. And as they waited for me to continue, I felt time slip backward, pulling me into memories I hadn't touched in decades. It was 1976, the summer heat blazing through the streets of Chicago. I was 21, a skinny kid with a booming laugh and dreams bigger than my wallet. Back then, I wasn't Leonard Hayes the waiter. I was Leonard Hayes the actor. I had landed my first speaking role on a local TV show, a gritty detective series called Midnight Streets. It wasn't national, not at first, but it got attention. People stopped me on sidewalks. Old ladies called me, that boy from the show. My father didn't understand it. Acting doesn't put food on the table, he'd say, slamming his fist on our kitchen counter. But my mother, God bless her, believed in me. She would sit by the TV every Friday night, her eyes glowing with pride when I appeared. You're going to make it, Lenny, she whispered. Just keep going. And I did. By the 1980s, I was on national television. Guest roles on sitcoms, small parts in movies. Nothing huge, but enough to make me believe I was climbing. I shook hands with stars. I walked sets where cameras rolled and directors shouted. I even had a fan club, tiny, but real. Then came 1985. The year I met Ruth. She wasn't impressed by the TV thing. She saw me for me. A broke dreamer who made her laugh, who carried her groceries, who talked about family more than fame. We got married in a small church on the south side, no cameras, no fuss. By 1988, Daniel was born. That was when everything shifted. I had a choice: chase Hollywood or be the father my son deserved. I chose fatherhood. I walked away from auditions that could have taken me to Los Angeles. I took jobs closer to home. Commercials, guest hosting, even the occasional voiceover gig. Enough to pay bills, but never enough to make headlines. Someday, Ruth said, holding my hand as Daniel slept in the crib, he'll understand what you gave up for him. But children don't always see sacrifices. Sometimes, they only see what's missing. By the 1990s, the phone stopped ringing. Younger actors replaced me. My agent stopped returning calls. The roles dried up, and so did the money. Ruth's health began to decline. I worked odd jobs, bartending, janitorial shifts, warehouse stocking. Anything to keep us afloat. Finally, I found Delaney's Steakhouse. Back then, it wasn't the high-class place it is now. Just a mid-level spot where tips were steady and hours were long. They gave me a uniform, a paycheck, and a little dignity. I told myself it was temporary, that something bigger would come. But temporary turned into decades. By the time Ruth passed in 2011, I had no career left, only memories of what once was. Daniel grew distant. College, new friends, a world far different from mine. When he met Sandra, I thought maybe things would heal. Instead, they grew worse. She saw me as an embarrassment, a man who never made it. She made sure Daniel saw me the same way. And now here I was, standing in their wedding hall, the smell of champagne and roses thick in the air, the weight of my past pressing against my chest. The crowd wanted answers. Sandra wanted me gone. Daniel wanted... Well, I wasn't sure what Daniel wanted. "You were an actor?" one guest finally asked. "Yes," I said simply. "Once." Sandra forced a laugh, brittle and sharp. "An actor? What, like commercials? Local theater?" Before I could reply, the man who had first recognized me spoke again. He was walking closer now, adjusting his glasses. No, I remember you. Midnight Streets. You played Detective Marco in Season 3. My dad loved that show. He never missed it." A buzz ran through the crowd. Others pulled out their phones, Googling, scrolling. And sure enough, my younger face popped up, frozen in still shots, a relic of another time. Sandra's face hardened. That was, 40 years ago? Hardly something to brag about. Her words stung, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I raised my chin. It was my life. And I gave it up so Daniel could have his. The room gasped. Daniel's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. I looked straight at him. "I had offers, Daniel. Big ones. But they would have taken me away from you, away from your mother. I chose to stay. I chose to be your father, not a man chasing lights on the other side of the country." The silence that followed was deafening. Sandra let out a sharp exhale, shaking her head. "Oh, please. That's just an excuse. You're a waiter because you failed. Don't stand here and pretend it was some noble sacrifice." Her words echoed like poison, and I saw Daniel flinch. He looked between her and me, torn, confused. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about me. This was about my son, about the truth he had never been told. I thought of Ruth again, of the night before she died. She had been so weak, barely able to hold my hand. "Promise me, Lenny," she whispered. "Don't let Daniel forget who you are. Don't let them erase you." I promised. But I had failed. For years, I stayed quiet. Let myself fade. Let Sandra's voice be louder than mine. But not tonight. Tonight, I would keep that promise. I stepped forward, the spotlight following me, every pair of eyes locked in place. I am a waiter, yes, I said. But I am not just a waiter. I am a father who gave up everything for his son. I am a man who once stood on sets and stages most people in this room could only dream of. And I am done being invisible. The crowd erupted in whispers, some clapping softly, others shaking their heads. Sandra's cheeks burned with fury. Daniel's eyes glistened, and I could see the battle inside him. For the first time in years, he was questioning everything she had told him about me. And that was enough. For now. But as I turned to leave the spotlight, something unexpected happened. A man stepped forward from the crowd. Tall, graying, dressed in an expensive suit. His voice carried over the room. "Leonard Hayes," he said slowly, as though tasting the name. "I've been looking for you. We need to talk." The room gasped again. Sandra froze. Daniel blinked in confusion. And me? My heart thudded in my chest. Because I knew that face. And if he was here, my past was far from finished. The ballroom felt like it had stopped breathing. Conversations froze, forks hovered above plates, and all eyes turned toward the tall man in the tailored gray suit. He moved with a quiet authority, the kind that made space open up around him without a word. His silver hair caught the chandelier light, and his sharp jawline was unmistakable. I knew him. I knew him immediately. Richard Callahan. One of the biggest producers of the 1980s, the man who had given me my first real shot. The man who had once promised me the world, before I chose a different path. "Leonard Hayes," he said again, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "It really is you." Sandra's grip tightened on Daniel's arm, her eyes darting between me and Richard like she was piecing together a puzzle she didn't want solved. Daniel looked lost, caught between loyalty to his new wife and the father he thought he understood. And me? My knees felt weak, but I straightened my back. Life has a cruel way of circling old roads, and tonight, one of those roads had just walked back into my son's wedding. "Richard," I said quietly, "didn't expect to see you here." His lips curved into a half-smile. "You never returned my calls, Leonard. 40 years, and I still remember the kid who walked away from the role of a lifetime." A murmur swept through the guests. Phones were out again, fingers scrolling frantically, trying to connect names, faces, and history. I could already see some of them whispering, "Producer, actor, mischance." Sandra forced another laugh, brittle as glass. "So what? He knew someone famous 40 years ago. That doesn't change the fact that he's been serving tables ever since." Richard turned his sharp eyes on her. "Young lady, do you have any idea what this man gave up? He was on the brink of stardom. We were lining him up for a role in Emerald City Nights. It was supposed to be his breakthrough." Gasps rolled through the crowd. Even Daniel blinked in shock. "Wait," he whispered. That was the movie that won 3 Oscars." "Yes," Richard replied. His voice carried authority, but his eyes never left mine. "Leonard was my first choice. And then he disappeared." I swallowed hard. The memories surged like a flood, crashing through years of silence. I remembered sitting in Richard's office, the script heavy in my hands. A leading role. A contract that could have set me up for life. Fame. Fortune. Everything I had dreamed of when I was 21. But Ruth was pregnant. She was scared, and she needed me. I could have flown to Los Angeles. I could have signed the deal. But something in me, something stronger than ambition, chose differently. "I can't leave," I had told Richard back then. "My family needs me." And I walked away. Now, decades later, Richard was standing in front of me, retelling the story I had buried. Daniel's eyes glistened with confusion and something else. Was it pride? Pain? He whispered again, "You gave that up for us?" Sandra's face twisted. "Don't romanticize this. He failed, Daniel. He didn't choose. He couldn't cut it. Look at him. He's a waiter." The word stung, but I stayed calm. I had nothing left to prove to her. My proof stood in the form of my son, whose hands trembled as the truth settled inside him. Richard stepped closer, his voice firm. He didn't fail. He sacrificed. And there's a difference. The guests erupted in murmurs again, and I felt the tide turning. 4 years, I had been invisible. Tonight, the spotlight, literal and figurative, was on me. But recognition is a dangerous thing. It doesn't just lift you, it exposes you. My secrets weren't done unraveling. "Leonard," Richard said softly, almost like a challenge. "You could have had it all. Why did you never come back? You had the talent. You had the face. Hollywood would have welcomed you again." I looked at the floor, at the glimmer of broken glass still scattered across the dance floor. Sandra's glass. My humiliation, shattered and shining under the chandelier. "Because sometimes," I said finally, my voice trembling but steady, "a man chooses love over legacy. And sometimes he pays the price." Daniel stepped forward now, pulling away from Sandra's grip. His voice shook. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you let me believe you were nothing?" The word "nothing" cut deeper than Sandra's cruelty, but I understood. My son wasn't trying to wound me, he was trying to understand. "Because," I said softly, "I didn't want you to grow up chasing ghosts. I wanted you to be free to make your own life without feeling you had to live in my shadow. I chose to stay small so you could dream big." His face twisted, torn between anger and sorrow. "But you let her," he pointed at Sandra, "treat you like dirt. You let me treat you like you were invisible." The words broke something inside me, but I forced a small smile. "It doesn't matter how you treated me, Daniel. What mattered was that you had a chance to live. That's what your mother wanted." At the mention of Ruth, silence fell again. Even Sandra shifted uncomfortably, sensing the weight of her absence. But Sandra wasn't done. She never knew when to quit. "This is pathetic," she snapped, her voice shrill now. "All of you are acting like this man is some kind of hero. He threw away his life, and now he wants applause for being a failure. Don't you see? He's spinning a sob story because it's the only thing he has left." Her words sliced through the room, and I saw heads turn, brows furrow, some nodding in agreement, others frowning. She was good at this, twisting truth into mockery. But before I could respond, Richard raised a hand. "Careful, young lady. You're speaking about a man who gave up more than you will ever understand. And if you think fame defines worth, then you've already lost more than he ever did." A cheer rose from somewhere in the crowd, quiet at first, then stronger. Someone clapped. Then another. Sandra's face turned scarlet. Daniel's voice cracked as he spoke again. "Sandra, enough." Her eyes snapped toward him. "What? You're seriously buying into this fairy tale? He's manipulating you." "No," Daniel said firmly, his voice louder now. "He's telling the truth. And I should have known it a long time ago." Sandra's jaw dropped, her grip slipping. For the first time that night, I saw her losing control. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Vindication. Just as the room seemed to lean in my favor, Richard's tone shifted. His eyes narrowed, and he spoke words that froze me to the bone. "Leonard, there's something else. Something you don't know." The air grew heavy. I stared at him, my throat dry. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, scanning the crowd before locking eyes with me again. "Back then, when you walked away from Emerald City Nights, we replaced you. But the man who took your role, he built his career on it. And he never stopped talking about you. He said you were weak, that you didn't have what it took. And he's still out there." The room erupted in whispers again. My stomach knotted. The face of that man, my replacement, burned in my memory. He had taken the life I might have lived. He had mocked me publicly more than once, back when I was already forgotten. And now Richard was telling me he hadn't stopped. Richard's voice was calm, but firm. "He's here, Leonard. Tonight. In this very city. And he's been waiting for a chance to drag your name through the mud again." The words hit like thunder. Sandra's smugness flickered back as though she had been given ammunition. Daniel looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. The guests leaned in closer, hungry for the drama. And me. My hands clenched into fists, my heart hammering like a drum. Because if what Richard said was true, Then my past wasn't just returning, it was about to collide with my present in the worst way possible. The ballroom seemed to tighten with every word Richard spoke. My heart pounded in my chest, and for the first time that night, my hands trembled. The man who had stolen my role, the man who had mocked me for walking away, was nearby. Sandra's smirk told me she welcomed this twist, like fate had handed her one last weapon to use against me. Daniel stood beside her, pale and uncertain, caught in the storm of revelations crashing over him. Then, through the double doors of the hall, a figure walked in. The conversations dropped to whispers, and I felt the air grow heavier with each step he took. He was older now, his hair thinner, but his posture still screamed arrogance. His tuxedo fit like it had been sewn onto him, and his smile carried the same venom I remembered from decades ago. Thomas Drake. The man who had become a household name because he stepped into the role I left behind. The man who had built an empire on top of my sacrifice. "Well, well, well," Thomas said, his voice smooth, mocking. "If it isn't Leonard Hayes." I was wondering if the rumors were true. The crowd erupted again, people recognizing the face they had seen in films, on billboards, in glossy magazines. Phones lifted higher, recording every second. Sandra lit up like a Christmas tree. "Oh my God, it's Thomas Drake," she gushed, grabbing Daniel's arm. "Do you see? This is who your father could have been, but wasn't." Daniel didn't answer. He just stared at me, waiting to see what I would do. Thomas closed the distance, stopping a few feet from me. "Still wearing bow ties and carrying trays, I see. Some things never change." I clenched my jaw. For years I had kept silent, convinced myself bitterness had no place in my life. But tonight, bitterness came to me whether I wanted it or not. "You always did love the sound of your own voice," I said, steady but sharp. The crowd gasped. Sandra practically glowed at the confrontation, as though it were entertainment crafted for her alone. Thomas chuckled, shaking his head. "I have to hand it to you, Leonard. You had the looks. You had the talent. But you didn't have the guts. You walked away, and I stepped up. That's the difference between a man who makes history and a man who wipes tables." The words burned, but I didn't flinch. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Daniel stepped forward, his voice uncertain. "Is that true? You replaced my father." Thomas grinned. "Of course. And thank God he quit when he did. Otherwise, you wouldn't be talking to me right now, the man who defined an entire era of cinema." Richard cut in sharply. "Don't give yourself too much credit, Thomas. Leonard's talent was 10 times what yours ever was. He chose family over fame, something you'll never understand." Thomas scoffed. "Family? Please. That's just a polite word for failure." The guests murmured, split between awe of Thomas's fame and sympathy for me. It was as though the entire wedding had transformed into an arena, with me and Thomas standing in the center of the ring. I took a slow breath, letting the silence hang. Then I spoke. "You're right about one thing, Thomas. I chose. And yes, I walked away. But I didn't fail. I raised a son. I stood by a wife through sickness. I put food on the table when no cameras were rolling. You call that failure? I call it life." The applause that followed was scattered, hesitant, but real. I saw some guests nodding, whispering. Sandra's face twisted with rage. Thomas laughed bitterly. "Touching. Truly. But tell me, Leonard, do you ever lie awake at night, thinking about what you threw away? About the life you could have had?" The question sliced deeper than I wanted to admit. Because yes, I had lain awake many nights, wondering what could have been. But regret didn't define me. Love did. Sacrifice did. "Every man wonders what might have been," I said quietly. "But not every man can look his son in the eye and say he never abandoned him for a paycheck." That landed. The crowd fell silent, Daniel's lips parted, his eyes glistening. For the first time all night, I saw pride flicker in his gaze. Sandra, however, wasn't finished. She stepped forward, her voice loud and sharp. "Don't let him fool you, Daniel. Look around you. He's nothing. He had a chance to be great and he blew it. And now he wants to drag us into his little pity parade." Her words cut through the applause, turning heads again. I felt the weight of humiliation pressing against me, but before I could speak, Daniel did. "Stop, Sandra." His voice was firm now, stronger than before. "You don't get it. He gave up everything for us. For me. You don't talk about him like that." The room buzzed with shock. Sandra's jaw dropped. "Daniel, you can't be serious." "I am," he interrupted. "For years, I believed he was just some old man working tables. I believed what you said. But now I know the truth. He didn't fail. He sacrificed." The applause grew louder this time, stronger. People clapped, some even standing. Sandra turned red, fury boiling in her eyes, but Daniel didn't look at her. He looked at me. And in that look, I saw something I thought I'd lost forever. Respect. Thomas, unwilling to be overshadowed, clapped mockingly. "Touching reunion, really. But let's not forget the truth, Leonard. You're here, in a cheap uniform, while I'm still on top of the world. Whatever noble speeches you make, the scoreboard speaks for itself." I turned to him, my voice low but steady. "And yet here you are, chasing me into a wedding you weren't invited to. Maybe you're not as on top of the world as you want everyone to believe." The crowd roared at that. Thomas's smirk faltered. Sandra looked as though she might explode. And Daniel smiled. Just a little, but enough to keep me standing tall. The tension reached its peak when Richard stepped forward again. "Leonard, I didn't just come here tonight by chance. I've been trying to find you for months. There's something bigger happening, and I think you're the only one who can help me." The room went silent again. Bigger? Help? What could Richard possibly mean? Thomas crossed his arms, his smirk returning. "Oh, here we go. The great Leonard Hayes comeback fantasy. You really think anyone in this industry cares about him anymore?" Richard ignored him, his gaze locked on me. "Leonard, there's a project. A series. They want someone real, someone with a story that can move people. I told them about you. And they want to meet you." Gasps rippled across the room. Phones lit up with messages, recordings spreading faster than wildfire. My chest tightened, my knees wavered. After all these years, after decades of silence, the industry that had forgotten me wanted me back. Sandra shook her head violently. "This is insane. Daniel, tell him this is insane. He's too old, too irrelevant. This isn't a fairy tale. It's pathetic." But Daniel didn't speak. He was still staring at me, his eyes shining with something I hadn't seen since he was a child. Hope. I felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on me, waiting for an answer. My throat was dry, my palms sweaty. But deep inside, something stirred. Something I thought had died years ago. A spark. And just as I opened my mouth to reply, Thomas leaned in close, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "If you take this, Leonard, I'll destroy you. I'll make sure the world laughs at you before it ever applauds." My heart thudded like a drum. The ballroom, the lights, the whispers, all blurred. Only his words remained, curling around me like smoke. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my son. It was about the truth. And it was about finally deciding whether I would let the past bury me forever, or rise one last time. The ballroom buzzed like a hive, whispers weaving through the air as I stood frozen. Richard's words rattled inside me, an opportunity after all these years. A second chance. But Thomas's warning still echoed in my ears, dripping with venom. I looked around. Guests were leaning forward, clutching champagne glasses, waiting for me to speak. Daniel's eyes held me steady, hopeful, pleading almost. Sandra glared, her jaw tight, her grip on Daniel's arm fierce enough to leave marks. And Thomas, of course, stood smug, daring me to step into the fire. I swallowed hard. My voice shook at first, but then grew firm. "Richard, I need time. This isn't something I can answer here, in front of everyone." The crowd groaned, disappointed, but I couldn't say yes or no, not with Sandra and Thomas circling like vultures. Richard nodded, understanding. "Fair. But don't wait too long, Leonard. The window is short. They'll move on if you don't act." He slipped me a card. The weight of it in my hand felt heavier than any tray I had ever carried. The moment eased, the crowd shifting back into clusters of conversation, but the tension lingered. I wanted to disappear, to breathe, but Sandra wouldn't allow it. "You cannot be serious," she hissed, dragging Daniel aside but speaking loud enough for half the room to hear. "You actually think this washed-up waiter deserves to stand in front of cameras again?" Daniel pulled his arm free. His voice cracked but carried power. "Stop talking about him like that. He's my father. He's earned the right to do whatever he wants." Sandra's eyes narrowed. "You're blinded by nostalgia. Don't you see? He'll embarrass you, embarrass all of us. You'll be known as the man whose father made a fool of himself trying to relive a dream." Her words stung, not because they were true, but because I feared they could be. Thomas sauntered over, his presence suffocating. "She's not wrong, Daniel. This industry isn't kind to ghosts. If he tries to step back into the spotlight, he'll be torn apart. Better to leave the past buried." I turned to him, my patience thinning. "Why do you care so much, Thomas? If you're as secure in your throne as you claim, what difference does it make what I do?" He leaned in, his smile sharp. "Because, Leonard, your story threatens mine. You returning would remind people where it all began. And I won't let that happen." For the first time that night, his mask slipped. His eyes burned not with confidence but fear. Fear that I could steal back what I gave up. I said nothing more. Instead, I tucked Richard's card into my pocket and walked out of the ballroom. My hands shook, my chest tight, but my mind clear. This wasn't over. The night air was cold when I stepped outside. The city lights flickered against the dark sky, and the sound of traffic hummed in the distance. I stood on the curb, breathing deeply, trying to still the storm inside me. Daniel followed. "Dad." I turned. He looked younger in that moment, stripped of the suit and the stress, just a boy again, searching for reassurance. "Do you want this?" he asked quietly. "Really want this?" I hesitated. I don't know. Part of me thought that part of my life was gone forever. But standing in there, hearing Richard say they want me, I felt something I haven't felt in years. He stepped closer. "Then do it. Please. Don't let them scare you away." Sandra's voice cut in, sharp as glass. "Daniel." She marched toward us, her heels clattering on the pavement. "Don't encourage this. He's too old. He'll humiliate himself. And us." Daniel spun on her. "Us? Or just you? Because all night it's been about how you look, what people will think of you. Not about him. Not about me." Her face flushed, her lips trembling with fury. "You're my husband. I'm trying to protect our future." "And I'm his son," Daniel said firmly. "And maybe my future is tied to finally standing beside him instead of against him." Sandra gasped, stunned. For once, she had no words. I put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "It's late. We'll talk tomorrow." He nodded, still glaring at Sandra, then walked me to the street where a cab waited. As I slid inside, I looked back through the glass. Daniel stood tall, defiant, while Sandra fumed beside him. For the first time, I saw where his loyalty truly leaned. The apartment felt emptier than usual when I returned. I sat at the kitchen table, Richard's card resting in front of me like a ticking clock. My mind spun through memories, of the stage lights, the roar of applause, the promises I left behind. And then the quieter moments, teaching Daniel to ride a bike, holding his hand after nightmares, standing over hospital beds when bills piled higher than dreams. Both lives were real. Both mattered. But which defined me? The phone rang. It was Richard. "I know you're doubting yourself," he said. "But listen, Leonard. They don't want a young face. They don't want a perfect star. They want a story that people can feel. And that's you. No one else." I gripped the receiver, my pulse racing. "And if I fail?" He paused. "Then at least you'll fail trying. Isn't that better than never trying at all?" The words echoed long after the call ended. The next morning, Daniel showed up at my door. He looked tired but determined. "I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what you said, about what Richard offered. If you take this, Dad, I'll stand with you. No matter what Sandra says. Tears pricked my eyes, but I held them back. You don't have to choose between us. Yes, I do, he said. And I have. Before I could answer, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find Thomas standing there, sunglasses on, smile wide. May I come in? He asked smoothly. Daniel bristled. What do you want? Thomas stepped inside uninvited. To make sure your father doesn't do something he'll regret. He turned to me. Leonard, let's be adults. You don't belong in that world anymore. Take your dignity and stay in the shadows. Because if you step into the light, I'll make sure it burns you alive. His words dripped like poison, but something in me snapped. I stood tall, meeting his gaze head-on. I've lived in the shadows long enough, I said. And if stepping back into the light means facing you, then so be it. Thomas's smirk faltered, just slightly. He adjusted his sunglasses and turned to leave. Then I'll see you on the battlefield. The door slammed behind him, leaving silence. Daniel looked at me, his eyes wide with both fear and admiration. So, what now? I picked up Richard's card, the numbers etched in bold black ink. My hands no longer trembled. Now, I said, we call. The phone dialed slowly, each beep sounding like a drumbeat. Richard answered on the second ring. Leonard, he said, breathless. Tell me you're in. I looked at Daniel. His face was steady, his jaw firm. For the first time in decades, I felt like I wasn't standing alone. I'm in, I said. Richard let out a cheer. Good. Then prepare yourself. Because the world is about to remember your name. I hung up the phone, my chest heavy but alive. But deep inside, I knew Thomas wouldn't let this go. He would come for me, harder than ever. And I was ready. The studio building loomed in front of me like a cathedral of glass and steel. Its polished windows reflected the rising sun, and as I stood on the sidewalk, I felt the weight of years pressing down on me. I hadn't walked through doors like these since I was a young man with a heart full of fire. Now, 67, I carried more scars than dreams. But Daniel was at my side, his steady hand on my shoulder, and that gave me courage. Richard greeted us at the entrance, his energy buzzing. Leonard, this is it. They're waiting upstairs. The executives, the director, the whole team. They know who you are now. Last night's videos are everywhere. People can't stop talking about you. I blinked. Videos. Daniel pulled out his phone, showing me clip after clip. My confrontation with Thomas, Sandra's insults, the applause when Daniel defended me, all of it had spread online overnight. Millions of views. Comments filled with words like legend, respect, second chance. My chest tightened. The world that once forgot me was suddenly looking again. Inside, the studio smelled of fresh paint and coffee, buzzing with the voices of assistants carrying scripts and producers barking orders. Richard led us to a sleek conference room with long glass walls. A dozen faces waited there, sharp suits and sharper eyes. At the head of the table sat a woman in her 50s, her hair silver, her presence commanding. This is Evelyn Harper, Richard whispered. Showrunner. The one who wanted you most. Evelyn rose and shook my hand firmly. Leonard Hayes. I've waited a long time to meet you. Please, sit. I sat, Daniel beside me. Evelyn wasted no time. We're developing a limited series. Not just another show, it's about sacrifice, resilience, fathers and sons. When I saw the videos last night, I knew we had our man. We don't want a polished celebrity. We want someone real. Someone who's lived. That's you. Her words struck like thunder. For decades, I thought the industry valued only youth and perfection. But here she was, saying my scars, my failures, my age, those were the very things that made me valuable. Tell me something, Leonard, Evelyn said, leaning forward. If we give you this chance, will you fight for it? Because I need more than a name. I need a soul willing to bleed on camera. The room fell silent. I thought of Thomas's sneer, Sandra's venom, the decades I spent carrying trays instead of scripts. I thought of Daniel, watching me with eyes full of hope. Yes, I said simply. I'll fight. A ripple of approval passed through the room. Evelyn smiled. Good. Then welcome aboard. Applause filled the air. My chest swelled with something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. But not everyone celebrated. Across town, Thomas sat in his penthouse, watching the same viral clips that had resurrected me. His glass of scotch trembled in his hand as he replayed the moment I stood tall against him, the crowd roaring. "This is nonsense," he muttered. "A relic doesn't get a comeback. Not when I'm still here." His agent, a slick man named Carl, shifted nervously. "The public loves a redemption story, Thomas. Leonard's return, it's all anyone's talking about. If he lands this role, he could steal the spotlight." Thomas slammed the glass down, shattering it. "Then we make sure he doesn't land it. We'll bury him before he even starts." Carl hesitated. "How?" Thomas's eyes darkened. "Every man has a weakness. And Leonard's weakness is his family." Meanwhile, Sandra sat alone in her car outside Daniel's office, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had watched the clips too, watched her husband defend the man she spent years belittling. Rage and fear twisted inside her. She whispered through clenched teeth, "I won't let him ruin everything I built." She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she swore she'd never use again. When the voice answered, her tone was sharp, cold. "Thomas Drake. We need to talk." Back at the studio, Daniel and I toured the set where filming would begin. It smelled of sawdust and paint, half-built walls waiting to become someone's living room. The young crew members glanced at me curiously, some whispering, some bold enough to smile. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. "Dad," Daniel said softly, "this is your world. You belong here." I squeezed his shoulder. "Not without you, son. I want you beside me. Always." His eyes glistened, and for a moment, the years of distance between us seemed to vanish. But that night, the storm began. Sandra confronted Daniel the moment he walked through their front door. "How dare you humiliate me in front of everyone last night? Do you know what people are saying about me now? That I married into a family of nobodies." Daniel dropped his keys on the counter, his voice firm. "Stop. This isn't about you. It's about him. For once, can't you see that?" Her lips trembled. "He'll fail, Daniel. And when he does, you'll both be dragged down with him." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then I'll go down with him. Gladly." Her eyes widened, fury mixing with panic. She knew she was losing him. That's when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the message, her expression shifting. "I have a meeting," she said quickly, grabbing her purse. "Don't wait up." Daniel frowned but said nothing as she stormed out. Sandra met Thomas at a dimly lit restaurant, their table tucked away in a shadowy corner. He raised his glass when she sat down. "Funny," Thomas said with a smirk. "I never thought we'd be allies." "I'm not your ally," Sandra snapped. "I'm protecting my marriage. Leonard's comeback, it threatens everything." Thomas leaned forward. "Then we're on the same page. We take him down before he rises. But it has to be public. Brutal. Unforgivable." Sandra hesitated, her nails tapping the table. "What's your plan?" Thomas's smile grew. "Simple. We expose him. Dig up anything we can. Debts, mistakes, secrets. If there's nothing, we fabricate. The court of public opinion doesn't care about truth, only spectacle. By the time we're done, no producer will touch him." Sandra's chest tightened. Part of her recoiled at the thought, but jealousy and fear overpowered her doubt. "Do it. Just make sure it ends him." Their glasses clinked, sealing a pact that would change everything. The following week, my first rehearsal arrived. I stood on the stage, script in hand, the bright lights blinding me. My palms sweated, my throat dry. The words blurred at first, but then Daniel's voice came from the wings. "You've got this, Dad." I looked at him, nodded, and began. The lines flowed. The emotions surged. For the first time in decades, I wasn't just Leonard Hayes the waiter. I was Leonard Hayes the actor. The crew clapped when I finished, and Evelyn's eyes shone with approval. "You're not rusty," she said. "You're raw. And that's better." For the first time, I believed I could do this. But as we left the studio that evening, a crowd of reporters swarmed outside. Flashes blinded me, voices shouted questions. Leonard, how do you respond to the rumors? What about the scandal from your past? Do you regret what you did to your family? I froze. What scandal? A reporter shoved a tablet in my face. Headlines screamed across the screen. Former actor Leonard Hayes abandoned first child. Secret past surfaces before comeback. A liar in a waiter's uniform. My stomach dropped. Daniel snatched the tablet, his face pale. This is lies. All of it. But the cameras rolled, the questions flew, and the damage was done. Someone had started a war. That night, Daniel paced my apartment, furious. It's Thomas. It has to be. He's trying to destroy you. I sat at the table, staring at the headlines. Lies so sharp they cut. I had never abandoned anyone. I had never lied about my past. But in the world of cameras and clicks, truth mattered less than noise. I knew he wouldn't stop, I whispered. But this could end everything before it begins. Daniel stopped pacing, his fists clenched. Then we fight back. Together. And for the first time in years, I believed we could. The headlines spread faster than wildfire. Every news site, every gossip blog, every trending feed had my name plastered across it, wrapped in lies. By morning, I couldn't even step outside without cameras flashing and microphones shoved in my face. Strangers eyed me on the street like I was both villain and curiosity. Daniel slammed the latest newspaper onto the kitchen table, his voice sharp with anger. They're saying you abandoned a child. That you had some secret family you walked away from. It's garbage, Dad. Absolute garbage. I rubbed my temples, the weight pressing heavier with each passing hour. It doesn't matter that it's garbage. People believe what they read. The producers will see this and wonder if it's worth the risk. The phone buzzed. It was Richard. His tone was urgent. Leonard, damage control. We need a statement. Fast. The studio's spooked. They're already asking questions. What should I say? I asked, my voice cracking. The truth, Richard said. But it can't just be words on paper. You need to show them who you are. Own your story before Thomas twists it any further. After the call, Daniel leaned forward, determination in his eyes. Then that's what we'll do. We'll fight fire with truth. The following evening, Richard arranged an interview on a respected late-night show. It wasn't just about clearing my name, it was about reclaiming it. Backstage, my hands shook. Decades had passed since I last faced cameras, and now they weren't here to cheer, they were here to judge. Daniel touched my shoulder. You're not alone. Say what you've always said to me. Be the man who raised me, not the man Thomas wants people to believe. The stage manager gave the signal. My heart pounded as I walked under the blinding lights, the applause polite but cautious. The host shook my hand and gestured to the chair. Leonard Hayes, he began, your name's been all over the news. People say you're making a comeback, but there are rumors. Let's talk about them. The audience shifted, leaning in. I drew a slow breath. Rumors spread faster than truth. Let me say this as plainly as I can. I never abandoned anyone. I devoted my life to one woman, one son, and one family. Did I walk away from fame? Yes. But I never walked away from love. That's who I am. The host nodded. Why leave fame behind at all? You were on the edge of stardom. My throat tightened. Because my wife was sick. Because my son needed me. Because applause fades, but family doesn't. I chose them. I'd choose them again. The silence was heavy. Then, applause broke out, louder than before. Some audience members even stood. The host smiled, leaning closer. That's powerful, Leonard. Do you know how rare it is to hear something like that in this town? I exhaled, relief rushing through me. But just as I felt the tide shifting, the host added, one more question. Your rival, Thomas Drake, he suggested you're not telling the whole story. Care to respond? The name made my stomach twist, but I forced myself steady. Thomas has spent his life chasing shadows. I won't spend mine fighting with them. If he wants to tear me down, let him try. But the truth doesn't break. The applause thundered again. For the first time since the lies began, I felt the audience with me. The interview aired that night. Clips flooded social media, and the tide began to turn. Hashtags about sacrifice and respect trended. People shared their own stories of choosing family over ambition, saying they saw themselves in me. But while the world warmed to me, Sandra seethed in silence. She sat in her car, scrolling through the comments, her hands trembling. Her alliance with Thomas had promised to ruin me, but now it seemed to be backfiring. Daniel had stopped answering her texts, had even moved some of his things into my apartment temporarily. "You're slipping away," she whispered, tears welling. "All because of him." Her phone buzzed. A message from Thomas. *, "We're not done yet. I have something stronger." *. Sandra wiped her eyes, clutching the wheel. She had made her choice, and it chained her tighter to Thomas. Meanwhile, Thomas prepared his next move. In his penthouse, he paced before Carl. The sympathy play worked for him. "Fine. Then we go deeper. Find dirt. Anything. A debt, an affair, a secret. If there's nothing, we'll invent it. The public won't care what's true once it's juicy enough." Carl hesitated. What if this backfires? He's getting a lot of love right now. People like an underdog. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Then we make him something worse than an underdog. We make him unforgivable. Back in my apartment, Daniel sat across from me, scrolling through his laptop. "Dad, look at this." There's a forum where people are digging into Thomas's career. They're finding old interviews, old crew members talking about how cruel he was on set. Some are even suggesting he sabotaged other actors back in the day. I leaned closer. "Sabotaged?" Daniel nodded. "One guy claims Thomas bribed producers to cut you out of your first big film. Says it ruined your chance at a breakout." My chest tightened. Pieces clicked together, years of confusion, of opportunities vanishing without reason. All along, it hadn't been fate. It had been Thomas. Daniel slammed the laptop shut. "We need to expose him. People should know what he did to you." I shook my head. "No, son. If we stoop to his level, we lose. This fight isn't about destroying him. It's about standing tall, no matter what he throws." "But, Dad—" "No," I interrupted gently. "The truth will rise on its own. We just have to hold steady." Daniel sighed, frustration flashing in his eyes, but he nodded. Days later, the studio summoned me. The producers were nervous, balancing the buzz around me with the noise of the rumors. Evelyn met me in her office, her tone direct. "Leonard, I believe in you. But this is Hollywood. Image is everything. If Thomas pushes harder, if Sandra keeps feeding him, the board may pull the plug. You need allies. Real ones." I nodded slowly. "Then I'll find them." And I did. Old friends from the theater days, crew members who remembered my loyalty, even fans who'd grown up watching my brief early work, they began to speak out. One by one, voices rose in my defense. Yet, as the support grew, so did the shadow looming over me. One evening, as Daniel and I left rehearsal, a black car pulled up. The window rolled down. Sandra's face appeared, pale, desperate. "Get in," she said sharply. Daniel bristled. "No. Not after everything. Please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Just hear me out." Against his better judgment, Daniel agreed. We climbed into the car, tension suffocating the air. Sandra's hands shook on the wheel. "I made a mistake. I worked with Thomas. I thought it would protect us, but it spiraled out of control. He doesn't just want to ruin you, Leonard. He wants to destroy everything, your career, your family, even Daniel's reputation." Daniel's face hardened. "You betrayed us." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know. And I regret it. But Thomas is dangerous. He has files, recordings, things he's ready to release. If you don't stop him, he'll scorch the earth." I stared at her, my heart torn between anger and pity. "Why are you telling us this now?" She whispered, broken. Because I don't want to lose my husband. And I don't want to see you crushed when you finally have a chance. Silence filled the car. Daniel's hand clenched into a fist, his jaw tight. My own chest burned with betrayal, but also with clarity. Thomas had drawn his battle lines. And now, Sandra had shown us just how ruthless he planned to be. That night, I stood at my window, the city lights shimmering like restless stars. Daniel paced behind me, his voice heavy. We can't let him win, Dad. Not again. But how do we fight a man who'll do anything? I turned slowly, my voice steady. We don't fight him with his weapons. We fight him with ours. Honesty, integrity, and a story stronger than his lies. Daniel frowned. But what if that's not enough? I looked him in the eyes. Then we make it enough. The fire in my chest burned brighter than it had in decades. For the first time, I wasn't running from the stage. I was stepping toward it. And this time, I wasn't alone. The night of the premiere arrived like a storm. Cameras lined the velvet ropes, flashes bursting in relentless rhythm, reporters shouting questions into the thick evening air. Banners with my name, Leonard Hayes, hung high on the theater's walls, the letters bold and unapologetic. For the first time in decades, I wasn't just a ghost in the crowd. I was the name on the marquee. Daniel walked at my side, his arm steadying me even though my heart felt strong enough to carry us both. Behind us, Evelyn coordinated the press, her phone buzzing every second. Sandra had been invited, but she lingered away from the spotlight, her expression unreadable as she clutched her purse against her chest. And somewhere in the shadows, I knew Thomas was watching. Inside, the theater hummed with power. Executives, critics, and celebrities filled the seats. The lights dimmed. A reel of interviews and behind-the-scenes clips played across the massive screen, voices narrating my journey, how I left fame for family, how I'd returned with nothing but honesty. The audience leaned forward, drawn into the story. But just as the applause began to build, a crackle buzzed over the speakers. The reel sputtered. The lights flickered. Then, a grainy video appeared on the screen. It was Thomas. He sat in his penthouse, a glass of scotch in hand, smirking at the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, before you crown Leonard Hayes a hero, perhaps you should know who he really is. This man is no saint. He's a coward. He walked away when he could have fought. He hid when the world needed him. Gasps rippled through the theater. Daniel shot to his feet. He hacked the reel. The video continued. And let's not forget his family. His son married into money because Leonard couldn't provide. His daughter-in-law came to me, begging for the truth. You're all being fooled by a washed-up dreamer. The screen cut to black. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. All eyes turned to me. I rose from my seat. My legs felt like stone, but my chest burned with fire. Slowly, I stepped toward the stage. Daniel tried to follow, but I held up a hand. This was mine to face. The host of the event whispered nervously into her mic, we seem to be experiencing technical difficulties. I reached the podium and gripped it with both hands. My voice trembled at first, then grew steady. You've just seen a man desperate to destroy me. A man who spent his life building walls of lies and shadows. And maybe he's right about one thing. I did walk away. I walked away from fame. From applause. From ambition. I paused, scanning the faces before me. But I didn't walk away from what mattered. I stood by my wife until her last breath. I raised my son. I worked jobs beneath me, above me, around me, anything to keep my family safe. If that makes me a coward in his eyes, then I will wear the title proudly. The room stilled, the weight of my words pressing deep. Because I'd rather be remembered as a man who chose love over ego than as one who clawed his way to the top by stepping on everyone else. Fame is fleeting. Integrity is not. The silence broke. Applause began, slow, tentative. Then it swelled, louder, until the entire theater roared. Backstage, Sandra stood in the shadows, tears streaking her cheeks. She whispered to herself, "He's winning this the right way." For the first time, she seemed to see me not as an obstacle, but as a mirror reflecting her own failures. Daniel rushed to embrace me when I left the stage. His voice cracked. Dad, that was everything. But before I could respond, security whispered something urgent into Evelyn's ear. She stiffened, then turned to us. Thomas is here. He forced his way inside. We found him in the lobby, surrounded by flashing cameras. His face was red, his tie askew, his arrogance slipping into desperation. "Don't cheer for this fraud," he bellowed, pointing at me as I approached. "He abandoned his career. He wasted his talent. He's nothing but a has-been clinging to pity." The reporters shoved their mics forward, eager for blood. I stepped closer, my voice calm, cutting through the chaos. "Thomas, you've spent your life fighting ghosts. Mine, others, maybe even your own. But tonight, those ghosts won't save you." He sneered. "You think you've won because they clapped for your sob story? You'll fade just like before." I met his glare. "Maybe. But when I fade, I'll fade with my head high. You'll fade with nothing but bitterness. And they'll remember that." The cameras caught every word. The crowd murmured, whispers spreading like fire. For the first time, Thomas looked small. Sandra stepped forward then, her voice breaking. "He's telling the truth. Thomas manipulated me. He used me to try and destroy Leonard. And I let him. But I won't anymore." Gasps. Shutters clicked. The betrayal was out in the open, raw and undeniable. Thomas's face twisted. "You ungrateful." Security moved in, pulling him back as reporters shouted questions. The scene exploded into chaos, but the damage was done. His mask had cracked before the world. The premiere went on, stronger than before. The film played to thunderous applause, critics calling it a triumph, a story not just of acting but of resilience. By the time the credits rolled, the theater rose in a standing ovation. Not for fame, not for spectacle, but for truth. As I stood with Daniel at my side, tears stung my eyes. This wasn't just my comeback. It was our victory. Sandra approached cautiously, her voice trembling. "Leonard, I don't deserve forgiveness. But I had to tell the truth tonight. I hope that counts for something." I looked at her, then at Daniel. Redemption is never about deserving. It's about choosing. What you do next will matter more than what you've done. She nodded, sobbing quietly. Later that night, after the crowds dispersed, Daniel and I stood outside under the cool glow of the marquee. The city hummed around us, alive and unyielding. "You did it, Dad," he whispered. "You proved everyone wrong." I shook my head, a soft smile forming. "I didn't do it to prove them wrong. I did it to prove to myself that I could stand again." We stood in silence, the weight of years finally lifting. For the first time in decades, I felt free, not because I had reclaimed fame, but because I had reclaimed myself. The lights flickered above us, bold letters spelling my name for all to see. But in that moment, the only name that mattered was the one my son spoke softly beside me. "Dad." And I knew the curtain had closed on bitterness, opening instead to something far greater, peace. Thank you for watching this journey. If you were moved by Leonard's story of sacrifice, betrayal, and redemption, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And remember, sometimes the greatest victory isn't the fame you win, it's the love you never lose. And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.